of the creatures of the spiritual realm. But before we begin, let's begin with a word of prayer. Merciful and gracious God, we thank you for all the rich blessings you have given us in this life, but we most especially thank you for your Son. As you constantly are building up your church to be in the image of your Son, help us to look to him for all the guidance that we ever need. In your Son's most precious name we pray. Amen. Amen. I don't know if you caught it, but today during the children's message, one of the little boys afterwards comes up to me and goes, Pastor, my brother wants to be a ababada. And I said, a what? An orabada. And finally the brother comes up and he goes, an ornithologist. I want to deal with bugs. Well, and I said, that's wonderful. You know? And they went back to, it was this, an obadada. Like, boy, I'm not getting it, pal. It was awfully cute. I think those kids always trip me out. They always say something funny. Anyway, all right. So we last time we met, we started talking about the rebellion. Okay, there was a rebellion in heaven. It first started with who? The father of all lies, Satan. Okay, but was the rebellion a one-time event or a progressive event? And this is the great dilemma. We don't have a really good timeline, do we? It's not like the Lord said, on day 496, or anything like that. So we don't really know, but we do know that there seems to be this kind of ongoing rebellion, okay? And this is where we get into trouble. Actually, let's just back up to page 16 and start with the third rebellion, okay? The rebellion of the divine council. So we had the rebellion of earth from heaven. Now we're going to talk about the heavenly rebellion. After Noah's sons, their wives get off the ark. Okay, they are told to disperse and go their own way, each becoming a network of people and groups to develop their own language. Now, it doesn't actually say go and become your own language, but it does say, what does God tell Noah and his family? Be fruitful and multiply. Go and subdue the earth. In other words, they are to spread out and do this. Why are we doing this? Why was Adam and Eve told to spread out and subdue the earth? This is all part of what we call image bearing. Okay? We are to be God's image to this planet. Okay? We are in the image of God, and then therefore we are to share that image of God with our world. Just like the heavenly creatures, the celestial creatures, are supposed to reflect the image of their creator. Okay? In the divine realm, we are supposed to reflect the image of our creator in this new terrestrial realm. The problem is, what happened right at the fall? We stopped reflecting the image of God. What does it clearly say? It says Adam's children were created in Adam's image. Okay? We lost that image of God. Now they're in the image of Adam. Well, of course, there was we could go on and on about, when we'll talk about Genesis 6 later, and the creation of the Nephilim and all these kind of celestial. So God decides, I'm going to start over, right? I'm going to wipe the slate clean and begin again. So he finds a faithful guy named Noah. The Lord was talking to Jesus about it, and he said, I'm going to start over. And Jesus says, I know a guy. Anyway, so they start over with this family, and then the command they give the family is the same thing they gave to Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And I hate that word subdue, because that is what it says in Hebrew, but it's like it's more like reign, rule in my stead. Okay? And so that was what Adam and Eve were to do. They were supposed to be like the Prince and Prince of Wales. They have a king, but they still control Wales. And by the way, being the Prince of Wales isn't really that great. If you've ever been to Wales, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so it is. You're supposed to be the ruler of this world. But of course, what did they do? They clumped together. So let's look at Genesis 10:1. These are the generations of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. the sons who were born to them after the flood. So they go out and they have more children, basically. Their wives are with them, and they have more kids. By the way, we don't even know if Noah had more children, if Noah and his wife had more kids. I mean, this is one of those things isn't recorded. It was entirely possible. We know that before that, people were having children up into their 400s and 500s. This is how we could have such a population boom. If your fertile period's 500 years, it's like you're going to have a lot of kids. I can't even remember the name of the two of mine half the time. I can't imagine having kids for 500 years. I'd be like, okay. Anyway, Genesis 10, 2 and 5. The sons of Japheth from the coastland peoples spread to their land, each with his own language, by their clans and their nations. Okay, so after the flood, they go out and Japheth becomes the coastal people. Genesis 10:6, the sons of Ham. These are the sons of Ham by their clan and language, their land and their nations. Again, we don't talk about it a great deal. Are you guys familiar with the table of nations? Yeah, where it talks about the division and where all these different people groups come from. Okay, and so the Hamites are what we would consider the Europeans, the Asian, the Indian, or not, actual Indians, not Native Americans. Okay, they went and subdued that part of the world. Okay, eventually, after the Tower of Babel, they all kind of went out, and so most of the world ends up becoming who? Hamite. Okay, we are the descendants of Ham. All right, which I always find fascinating because we have all this like, oh, those people are so different from me, and those people. Turns out the bulk of us came from the same guy. All right, and we know this genetically. That's what's fascinating is when they look at the Y chromosome, there were 3 men that all men descended from, and it turns out those 3 men all had the same dad. Gee, I wonder. In fact, the geneticist who discovered this was not a believer. And when he saw this, he was like, I can't present this because it will do what? Back up. So they come up with this crazy bottleneck theory that, after a great calamity like something or other, whatever. And then they also, they have a calculation for what they call genetic drift, which is a change in genes, which I think can happen much quicker than they say it does. They're saying it takes, thousands and thousands of generations for this genetic drift. Well, I think DNA can be damaged pretty quickly. Yeah, John.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we went to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky.
Oh, fun.
And they proposed that because Japheth, Ham, and Shem were all brothers, and now the peoples of this world are so different, they figured their 3 wives must have been more of different colors of skin.
Well,
they don't know. They proposed that. A lot of things they try to explain at the Ark Encounter. How did this lead to that?
Yeah. Well, here's the problem with that, though. They were all from Adam, and the world was fairly homogeneous prior to the flood. Okay. Why do we have different skin tones? Why do we have all this? It is a reaction to damage. Okay. It is all a reaction to the damage caused by the flood. Before the flood, the firmament was in place, so there wasn't the genetic damage coming down, the radiation and stuff. I think what happened after the flood, we lost that firmament layer that was protecting the earth, and it accelerated. And this is what it's not evolution. It is adaptation and devolution from what God built us to be. And we know, like in Asia, that they find these ancient tombs of Asians. Well, guess what? They don't have the what we call the Mongoloid skull. They have more of a European style skull. Why is that? Because it only took 2 generations for that adaptation to occur. They believe that adaptation occurred from a lack of calcium. And so it was the body's reaction to this lack of calcium. So who was successful? Those who could adapt to not having the calcium. Okay? We're not as far removed from one another as they claim. The one thing about the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth that I'm always curious about, did any of them have Nephilim DNA? And here's why I say that, because later in the scriptures we see not the Nephilim, but the Rephaim, which are the descendants of the Nephilim. You're probably familiar with the biggest one of those, Goliath, okay, is a giant. And he's got 6 fingers. And he's got all these brothers with 6 fingers, okay? Where did that DNA come from? You know, I think it came from the wives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Probably Ham's wife, because Ham's kind of a jerk. But yeah, it's just his wife kind of pushed him towards it. No, I'm kidding. We have no evidence of that. So, yeah, we don't really know. We don't know what the wives look like. We don't know what they look like. I will say this, from some of the more ancient peoples we know, they are very different looking than the people around them. One of the biggest groups we can look at is the native Inuit to Japan. They're called the AI, okay? If you look at the AI, they don't look Japanese, they don't look European, they don't look black, they look AI. And I honestly think that's more what we all looked like at one point. You know, some of them have curly black hair, some of them have black straight hair, some have red hair, some have, it's like they are the most confusing mix of races. In fact, I thought they were, when I first saw them, I thought they were some kind of like interbreeding. No, but that's what the people look like. And we know they're one of the oldest people groups in the world, genetically, because they were isolated on the island of Japan. And so I think that's probably what we all look like. I will tell you, at the resurrection, people always like, oh, what am I going to look like at the resurrection? You're going to look like you, but you'll be a perfect you. Okay? You'll be the best version of you. Will you be known? Yeah, it says you'll be known as you are known. Okay? I'm going to walk up and be like, oh, Dave, you look so young,
23.
30. 30. I believe that's the age. But it'll be a perfect 30. It will be a perfect 30. And so you will be young and good looking, and you'll all look like me, and it'll be But yeah, and you got to remember too, like when it comes to race, like people are like, oh, what? God is a God of life and creation. He built into all of us this miraculous system of, as I call the DNA blender, where you can put in 2 people and spit out Evelyn and Margaret, and it's like, and he loves to create. So all of these different characteristics that we all share or don't share, it's because God is a God of creation. He is a God of infinite, you look at the complexity of our DNA, it is wild, what we are capable of becoming, And so, yeah, I think unfortunately our world has gotten this racialized idea instead of like just the flat out, fellowship of humanity idea. We're all from the same people. Eventually we could trace all of us back to Noah, okay? And people say, well, who's your ancestor? And I say, I know a guy. Sorry, that joke, I'm just going to recycle that until I get it. All right. Genesis 10:21 through 31. To Shem, also the father of the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem and to Eber were born 2 sons, and the name of one of those sons was Peleg, for in his days the land was divided. In other words, it doesn't literally mean the dirt split up. What does it mean? Languages. It's the Tower of Babel. And his brother was named Joktan, and these are the sons of Shem by their clan, their languages, their lands, and their nations. So this is after the Tower of Babel, when God has confused our languages. And he confused the languages, why? To curb our sinning. Okay? When we could all talk together, we were plotting bad things. Okay? So he confused the languages, and all of a sudden we go off in all directions. This is why if you ever study, I think I've talked to you a little about this in ancient Chinese, how many of their characters have a biblical root? Like the word for east is tower confusion. You know, in ancient Chinese, it is the symbol for tower and the symbol for confusion. Okay, why? Because that was, or west, not east, west. Well, that's where they came from. It's tower confusion and the symbol for walk. I mean, it's west. So now the communists have done a great job of erasing all of that ancient character out of the language. But if you really are curious about it, I could sit down and share that with you. There's so many things. Like, what's the word for righteousness? A lamb over me. You know, what's the word for deceiver? Snake in garden with two people.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they had a ton of the original story, but of course what happens, it gets lost. Yeah, Moms.
Mouth.
Oh, mouth, yeah. What is it? Is it hunger or mouth?
H.
Yeah, no, it's vessel. It's vessel. They have a word for boat, but the word for big boat is boat with 8 mouths in it. 8 people in there. Gee, I wonder where that came from. You know, so the word for vessel is a big boat with 8 people inside of it. And so it's like it's so many of these characters, like, tell the story pre-Babel. You know, and again, it's just fascinating when you really dig into human history. We all come from the same tower of confusion. Okay? And we had to walk away because we couldn't talk to one another anymore. Because we refused to do what God told us to do in the beginning, which was disperse and subdue. Okay, we were too busy trying to maintain our own. By the way, Chinese history is fascinating. Their first emperor worshipped one god, Shandi. Okay, and there was only one high god of heaven. It wasn't until like 2 generations later they started worshiping a pantheon. And so you see all this kind of crazy stuff start to happen kind of quickly, like once they fall away. But anyway, the 3 sons of Noah are listed along with their many descendants, make up the 70 nations in the list. But notice that each list ends with the phrase, each with his own language. All right. This story assumes the nations were already divided up by their own language. However, this story is not yet, because it was found in the next chapter, chapter 11, okay, which of course is Babel. Right. The division of the descendants of Noah is connected to an obscure comment in Genesis 10:25, that in the days of Peleg, the land was divided. Whatever it was that separated the nations into the languages is called the division in this passage. The division happened in the days of Peleg, which is division in Hebrew. The reader is left to ponder until one discovers the backstory in Genesis 11, which is about the very thing that scattered the divisions of the nation. Okay, so again, this is the problem with the genealogies in the Bible. Sometimes you get the genealogy before other stories. You know, it says this is so-and-so is the... Well, think about it in the genealogy of Jesus. Okay, we get the genealogy all the way down to Jesus, but we don't know anything about Jesus until we've read what? The rest of the gospel, right? It doesn't make any sense. Why are we giving this guy's genealogy? Oh, we're giving his genealogy because he is the final human. Okay, so this leads us to an obvious conclusion that Genesis chapter 10 and 11 are not arranged in chronological order. Instead, they have been placed in reverse order for thematic reasons. The author wanted to present the rebellion at Babylon. Now the whole land used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used bricks for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach the heavens. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." In other words, they want to clump. God told them to spread, they want to clump. By the way, I saw a really awesome documentary on this. They said, well, they could never build a tower with the mud bricks of that day. The Bible clearly says they weren't mud bricks. What does it say? They burned them. They didn't just leave them in the sun, they burned them. And what does that do? That takes the moisture out of the brick. Well, they did this they have one of these great, presses where they, figure out how much, and a mud brick could hold 4 stories or something and started to crumble. Those bricks could hold thousands of pounds. I mean, the machine was straining to crack one of these things. And then the guy was talking about if you have enough of them spread out, it disperses the load. They could easily build a tower. Okay. Now, there's another kind of interesting thing. Why would they use tar instead of mortar? What do you think that's about? Waterproof. Exactly. Why is it waterproof? If God ever floods this place again, we'll get up on top of that tower and be safe. And so it's about safety, that they're going to get themselves up onto that tower and survive. Okay. Now remember too, up in the Garden of Eden is depicted as a mountain garden, right? Where God comes down. So what are they, in a sense, trying to do with this Tower of Babel? We're going to create our own safe space where we can be king. Okay. You think safe spaces started a few years ago in colleges? No, this was all the way back here. Okay, they're going to build a safe space where they're going to get up high. If he floods the place again, we're going to do our best to do what? Stay safe and be up above the water. Okay. Again, it's a much more rebellious act than I think we understand. Okay. By the way, how far did they get on the tower? Not very far. Not very far. God looks down and he goes, oh, let's go see what man's doing. He knew what man was doing. Okay. He's going down with the celestial beings to do what? Handle this. Okay. I'm going to go. Boy, it's going to be funny. You're going to wake up tomorrow and your wife and you aren't ever going to talk the same language, and it's still true.
That's worse.
No.
Have they found ruins of a structure that they think that might? I thought I saw that on TV.
Yeah, there's a couple of different theories on this. I just lost his name. I think it's Knoll. Anyway, there's an author who believes he has actually found the remnants of the Tower of Babel. Everybody says it's Babylon. Well, you got to understand, Babylon is a region, not a city. Okay, Babylon can refer to a city-state, and so it's in, I want to say, Eridu or something like that. They believe they found this platform that they started construction on. They built several layers of tar bricks and stopped. They didn't get very high. And so I think that was the actual tower. Gosh, what is that guy's name? I got 4 of his books and I can't remember his name right now. He's not a Christian, by the way. He's not even a Jew. He's an archaeologist. And he says the problem is we are so quick to dismiss the history of the Bible, we don't realize how accurate it is if people just show up and look at it, if you've ever seen any of the, what is that book or that movie, the Exodus Revealed and all that kind of stuff, he gives a lot of evidence for that. So, but anyway, so yeah, they think they have found the remnants of it, or the beginnings of it. Again, it's not very much. It's like barely a man tall, what we have left. Okay. Over the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do. In other words, I walk out of the room for 2 seconds, and this is what you guys do? You trash this place. What they do, and now nothing for which they propose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so they will not understand one another's speech. Again, culture and speech are so interlinked. Okay, your culture is driven by what? Your language. How could we have culture without a common language? We can't have a common culture without a common language. And you think about the confusion of language. Okay, I got this here. I'm going to make up a word here. Obelisk. No, that's an actual word.
Use little Jacob's words.
Yeah. Babadabada. Babadabadoo. And you look at that and you go, what is it? Is he talking about the bottle? Am I talking about the tea in the bottle? Am I talking about the fact this is cold? Am I saying give it to you? How can we possibly communicate our culture through language when our languages are so divided? So all of a sudden, this is where the term ethnos in Greek appears. You have ethnicity, okay? You have ethnicity because of what? Shared language. Okay, this is how culture can develop. This is how cultures split in different directions, right? Because they were speaking different languages. One great example of that, look at the Germans and the English. Okay, the English one point spoke German. Okay, 150 years, 200 years later, they're not even the same people anymore. When you ask an Englishman if he's German, do they say, "Oh yeah"? No, we can't stand those crowds. You know, and it's because their languages have developed in their own way. The problem is language is a living thing. It's always changing. It's always modifying. And it's always growing. Here's a great example. I love this. The other day I walked into a grocery store, and there was a bag of popcorn, and it was called poppycock.
Oh, yeah. You know that. Grandma loved it. Poppycock.
Okay, that was one of the dirtiest words in the English language not that long ago.
Right.
Okay, it was filthy. How, you know? And now we call it candy. Okay, you know, language changes. Language changes. In the time of Charles Dickens, if you said good afternoon, that was like telling somebody to F off. Okay? But now I say good afternoon to people all the time, don't I? Hey, good afternoon. Actually, I say it in a bad way. But no, yeah. The point is language is always changing and evolving. And the problem is, where does that impulse for it to modify come from? Right here. This idea that language is always shifting. Yeah.
Oh, many years ago, I don't remember, 10 years ago or so, there was a documentary on the history of the English language.
Uh-oh.
No, it was very interesting, and I don't know how to find it again, but it talked about early English and then how we got our English through European language and such. It was so interesting.
English is
I'd love to see it
a
again.
fascinating language because it's super adaptable.
And it has changed.
It can change dramatically because it's not inflected. And depending on the culture group that came in, when the Normans came in, it changed English a great deal. Here's an example. Do you eat pig or do you eat pork?
I eat pork.
You eat pork, right? That's the French word. And they were French nobility. So the peasants ate pig and they ate pork. And so we started having I don't eat cow, I eat beef. Okay? It's because our language adapted to these input of these new cultures. Our language is very adaptable. We are now have more non-native English speakers than native English speakers. People who have learned English. There are more people who have learned English than people who were born and learned to speak English. And that's going to change our language a great deal too. Because you get languages like Chinese, which aren't word order languages. And so they put it in Chinese grammar with English words. And it makes sense. Why? Because English is so adaptable. It's a crazy, crazy language on that level. It is certainly kind of a universal language. You know what other language was like that? Koine Greek, the language of the Bible. And I think why did the Bible, why did it take so long? We needed a universal language like that in place so that what? The message of the gospel could be spread so easily. Everybody spoke Arabic, they all spoke multiple languages, but everybody knew Koine Greek. That's what it means, common Greek. And so it wasn't the high Greek, it wasn't like Shakespeare. It was like American. And so it's a really interesting. I love languages, by the way, and I love studying languages. Yeah,
Shocker.
big shock, right? You guys know I'm taking Japanese, right? Working really hard on learning Japanese, and so it's been that is a hard language. Boy, you talk about different. It's a very challenging language on that level to learn, but I'm getting there. Classes start again at the end of the month. I have to go back to school, and so I'm taking an online class at the local community college. And so, but yeah, so it's
enough to do.
I was just getting bored. I need intellectual challenges. I really do. I like to study the Word of God, but I also I love just to study and to learn. It's like I feel like if I stopped, I'll just what?
Atrophy.
Somebody caught that at least. I think the ability to speak is so. Anyway, so what's that?
They were losing that with the social speak with children and kids.
Well, kids, I see it with my own children. Their perspicacity is so low, and it's because they don't read, they watch, and they mimic what they watch. And what you watch is boiled down to the lowest common denominator. I tried to make them watch Hamlet the other day. It would have been better if I'd pulled their fingernails out with a pair of pliers. Okay? It was like, I loved Hamlet as a kid. I loved Shakespeare as a kid. No, jazz is so they don't do it anymore. The world has changed a great deal. And that's okay. It's supposed to devolve. It's got to get worse so the Lord will return. Anyway, let's keep going here. Page 18. After being exiled from Eden, humanity was forced to go east, Genesis 3:24. And so too Cain was exiled further east after murdering his brother. So too here, after surviving the flood, humanity's journey east does the opposite of what God told Noah after the flood. Remember, after the Garden of Eden, what did Cain do after murdering Abel? He went east and built the land of Nod, named it after his son. Okay? And so now we get off the boat. It's supposed to be a new garden, and what do? We head east and build a city just like Cain did. What is a city? A city is to replicate what we lost in the Garden of Eden. It's supposed to be a place to minimize the damage done by the curse. Okay? Instead of spreading out and filling the land, Noah's descendants do the opposite. They band together in an effort to avoid dispersing. The city and tower were built not an average building project. The ancient Israelites knew exactly what Babylonian towers were all about. They were ziggurat temples, which were a symbolic building designed to be a man-made cosmic mountain. You look at these things. Have you ever seen the pyramids, like in person? Yeah, me neither. But they are enormous. What are they? They're man-made mountains. Okay? Why are all of these ancient cultures building man-made mountains? They lost the man-made mountain of Eden. Okay? Or the God-made mountain of Eden. This is why so many ancient cultures, what happens? Sacrifices happen up at the top of these things. They go up there and communicate with a god at the top of these things. Early culture very much viewed these as a replacement mountain for what we lost. Okay, they might not know the words, but they have this impulse to do it because they know what we lost. And so ziggurats, pyramids, all these different towers, they're supposed to be man-made mountains. Okay.
Were they also influenced by the evil
Nephilim and stuff? I don't know, possibly.
To worship them.
Yeah, that is
is
certainly something we could talk about. I don't want to get into it too much today, but like the difference between Mount Hermon and Mount Zion. Mount Hermon, also commonly referred to as the gates of hell, in the scriptures, where supposedly false gods descended. That's where Baal and all these people descended, was on Mount Hermon. And so Mount Hermon definitely has that characteristic. By the way, also, this is kind of funny. Everybody accuses Jesus. They accuse him of being Beelzebub. And we think that means devil. It doesn't. It's Baal. Zebel. It is the god Baal. So he had been up north at Hermon, and then they accuse him of being what? Under the influence of that false god. But anyway, that's a whole nother can of worms. But the problem with this topic is, how long could we talk about all this stuff? Forever, until my voice really did fail, with the rest of my body. We're going to stop right. Hang on, let's get through this last paragraph, and then we're going to stop. This story presents Babylon as a human attempt to reverse humanity's exile from Eden. Babylon is an anti-Eden, where humans try to ascend to the skies and assert themselves over God's wisdom and authority. This is why God scatters them, resulting in the diverse language and 70 scattered nations in Genesis 10. This story is clearly focused on the human actors in the story, but the drama of Babylon's rebellion does not end there. Okay, that's where we're stopping for today. Any thoughts, questions, or comments?
I thought once you said it was 72, not 70.
It depends if you're reading the Septuagint or if you're reading the Masoretic text. It is. Are you reading the Greek translation or the Hebrew? And this is where things get really confusing. This is why the Greek translation was the most common by Jesus' day. And so when he picks the number of disciples to send out, how many does he send? 72. Because it's the most commonly read version. So it's the reconquering of those 72 nations. And so it gets really, in fact, it was funny in my pastoral ongoing education class a couple of weeks ago. I actually, I knew the answer to why there was a difference. And the professor was like, "Where did you learn that?" And I go, "I didn't stop studying when I got out of the sim." And so I was really proud of myself. But anyway, I was the only one. Okay. I know, I broke my arm and patted myself on the back. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, I think we're going to end there. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all, and I pray you all have a blessed week, and I will see you Saturday.
Yeah.